The text came at 8:42 p.m. on New Year's Eve, while I was curled up in my apartment, debating whether to even bother staying up until midnight. I had no big plans, just a quiet evening with snacks and a list of resolutions I'd probably ignore by February. Then my phone buzzed. "Skating rink, midnight countdown. Don't chicken out." The message was from Alex. He was always orchestrating something absurdly elaborate for New Year's. This time, though, there was no explanation, no playful emojis, just a location pin. My stomach twisted when I saw it. The pin marked an old, abandoned outdoor rink deep in the woods, miles from town. I should have ignored it. But Alex had a way of making everything sound thrilling. I'd been stuck in a rut lately, too. Maybe this was exactly what I needed, a spontaneous night out with friends to break the monotony. By 10:30 p.m., I was crammed into Alex's beat-up van with Sarah, Tim, and Claire, the smell of damp wool and old coffee filling the cabin. The conversation was light, punctuated by laughter, but as we turned off the main road and onto the narrow snow-covered trail leading to the rink, a heavy silence settled over us. The headlights barely cut through the swirling snow. When we finally arrived, the rink took my breath away. It was a ghostly expanse of ice, lit by the eerie glow of a full moon. The surface shimmered, perfectly smooth, reflecting the skeletal trees that loomed around it. Nearby, a small wooden cabin leaned precariously against the wind. A single bulb above the door flickered erratically. "This is incredible," Claire breathed, pulling her scarf tighter. "Incredible or creepy," Sarah muttered, her voice muffled by her coat. Alex grinned, the same mischievous glint in his eyes that usually signaled trouble. "It's both. That's what makes it fun." As we laced up our skates, the cold bit through my gloves. The air felt unnaturally still, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. My unease grew with every passing moment, but I forced myself to smile, determined not to be the buzzkill. When I stepped onto the ice, a strange sensation rippled through me. The surface was too perfect, too polished, as if it had been waiting for us. Beneath my skates, the ice seemed to hum faintly, a low vibration I couldn't shake. We glided across the rink, our laughter echoing in the stillness. For a while, the unease faded, replaced by the rush of cold air and the rhythmic scrape of blades on ice. Alex had even brought a portable speaker, blasting cheesy pop songs that somehow felt comforting against the ominous backdrop. "Midnight countdown on the ice," Alex announced, spinning in a sloppy circle. "It's tradition now." "What tradition?" Sarah shot back, rolling her eyes. "I'm starting it tonight," he said with a smirk. It was close to midnight when the cabin's flickering bulb finally died. The sudden darkness caught us off guard, silencing our laughter. The only light came from the moon and the faint reflection of stars on the ice. "I guess this adds to the atmosphere," Tim joked, but his voice wavered. Then came the sound. A low, groaning creak that reverberated beneath us. "Just the ice settling," Alex said quickly, though his eyes darted to the ground. I looked down, and my stomach flipped. Something moved beneath the surface, a shadow, darting and weaving. At first, I thought it was just the warped reflection of a tree. But it was too deliberate, too fast. "Did anyone else see—" I started, but my words caught in my throat as the shadow stopped directly beneath Tim. The ice cracked sharply under his skates, the sound like a gunshot. "Whoa!" Tim yelped, stumbling back. He caught himself before he fell, laughing nervously. "Okay, maybe this rink isn't as solid as it looks." None of us laughed. My eyes were glued to the crack beneath his feet. It was spiderweb thin, but through it, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A hand. Pale and skeletal, it pressed against the underside of the ice, its fingers dragging across the surface. "Tim, get off the—" I shouted, but before I could finish, The ice gave way beneath him. His scream tore through the night as he plunged into the black water below. We rushed to the edge of the hole, but he was gone. The ice sealed over the opening almost instantly, the surface smooth once more, as if nothing had happened. "What the hell was that?" Claire screamed, her voice shaking. I don't know," Alex stammered, for once at a loss for words. Then the shadows began to move again, faster this time, circling beneath us like predators stalking prey. "Run!" Sarah shouted, but there was nowhere to go. The edges of the rink were suddenly blocked by thick mounds of snow that hadn't been there before. We were trapped. Something brushed against my skate, and I nearly lost my balance. I glanced down just in time to see a pale, hollow face staring up at me from beneath the ice. Its mouth opened in a soundless scream, and clawed hands began raking against the surface, cracking it. This was no ordinary rink. We weren't alone out here. And whatever was beneath the ice, it wanted us. The sight of that hollow face beneath the ice, its mouth frozen in a silent scream, paralyzed me. The scratches against the surface grew louder, more frantic, as the face twisted and contorted in unnatural ways. Around me, my friends were shouting, their voices a jumble of panic, but the sound seemed distant, muffled by the sheer weight of the horror beneath my feet. "Move! We need to get off the ice!" Sarah's voice broke through the haze, and she grabbed my arm, pulling me back toward the center of the rink. "Where do we go?" Claire's voice was high-pitched, on the edge of hysteria. She stumbled, her skates catching on a thin crack that had formed beneath her. "Anywhere but here," Alex snapped, though even he sounded terrified. He spun in place, looking for an escape. The snowbanks surrounding the rink weren't just barriers, they seemed to pulse, rising higher with every passing second. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it a strange, guttural whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Hunger. As we huddled together, the shadows beneath the ice swirled faster. They no longer moved aimlessly, they were converging on us. Dozens of pale faces appeared, their hollow eyes fixed on us, their hands clawing furiously at the barrier separating them from us. "We have to make a break for the cabin," Alex shouted, pointing toward the dark silhouette at the edge of the rink. "Are you insane?" Claire snapped. "We can't make it. We don't have a choice." Alex was already moving, his skates cutting jagged lines in the ice. Reluctantly, the rest of us followed, each step feeling like a gamble. The ice groaned beneath us, the cracks spreading wider. One wrong move, and we'd be swallowed whole. The shadows were relentless. They followed us, their movements inhuman, jerky, and impossibly fast. I caught glimpses of their features, elongated jaws, blackened teeth, hands with too many fingers. Each time I looked, the details became worse, as though the mere act of seeing them was inviting them closer. Claire was the first to falter. Her skate caught on a crack, and she tumbled forward, sprawling onto the ice. Before any of us could react, one of the figures surged upward, its skeletal hand punching through the surface and wrapping around her ankle. "Help me!" she screamed, kicking wildly as it dragged her toward the widening fissure. Sarah lunged forward, grabbing Claire's hands, but it was no use. The creature's grip was too strong. Claire's screams turned guttural as she was pulled beneath the ice, her face vanishing into the black void. The surface froze over instantly, erasing all traces of her. "Run!" Alex yelled, his voice breaking. The cabin was just ahead, its dark windows like empty eyes staring at us. I could feel the ice shifting beneath me, the creatures growing more aggressive, their claws scraping ever closer. When we finally reached solid ground, we collapsed in a heap, gasping for air. But we weren't safe. Not yet. The cabin door creaked open on its own, revealing a dim interior lit by a single flickering candle. "This is insane," Sarah muttered, her voice trembling. "Do you have a better idea?" Alex snapped, shoving the door open further. With no other option, we stepped inside. The cabin smelled of damp wood and something metallic, like rust or old blood. The air was frigid, our breaths forming white clouds as we moved deeper inside. The walls were covered in strange carvings, symbols, and figures that seemed to shift and writhe when viewed out of the corner of my eye. "What is this place?" Sarah whispered, running her fingers over one of the carvings. "It's some kind of ritual space," Alex said, his voice unsteady. He pointed to a large circular etching in the center of the floor. It was surrounded by runes and pictograms, all radiating an energy that made my skin crawl. On a nearby table lay a tattered journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. Alex picked it up and began flipping through, his brow furrowing. "It's a ritual," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "This rink, it's not just a rink, it's a gate, and those things under the ice, they're trapped there." "Trapped," Sarah echoed, her voice shaking. "Trapped by who?" "Whoever built this place," Alex said, gesturing to the carvings. "This circle, it's supposed to keep them contained, but it's failing." "What do we do?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. Alex hesitated, his eyes scanning the journal. "There's a chant, a countdown. It says we can close the gate again if we complete it before midnight." "And if we don't?" Sarah asked. He didn't answer. The guttural whispers outside grew louder, more insistent. The creatures were no longer content to stay beneath the ice. Their shadows flitted across the cabin walls, their claws scratching at the windows. "We have to start now," Alex said, his voice trembling. We stood in the circle, the journal open in Alex's hands. He began to recite the chant, his voice steady despite the rising chaos outside. Sarah and I joined in, our voices stumbling over the unfamiliar words. The room seemed to vibrate with energy, the symbols on the walls glowing faintly. The whispers outside turned into shrieks, the creatures slamming against the cabin, their fury palpable. Then the door burst open. One of the creatures lunged inside, its skeletal form barely contained by its translucent skin. Its hollow eyes locked onto Sarah, and before I could react, it struck. Her scream was cut short as it dragged her from the circle, her body convulsing as frost spread across her skin. "Keep chanting," Alex shouted, gripping my arm. Tears blurred my vision, but I forced the words out, the air around us growing colder with each syllable. The creatures howled, their movements frantic, but the circle held. With one final word, the cabin exploded in blinding light. When the light faded, the creatures were gone. The ice outside was silent, still, but we were alone. And something told me the gate wasn't closed for good. The silence was deafening. My breath came in shallow gasps, each exhale visible in the icy air. The cabin was eerily still, the glow of the carvings on the walls fading into darkness. Outside, the wind had stopped. The world seemed frozen, suspended in an unnatural stillness. I turned to Alex. He was on his knees, clutching the tattered journal like a lifeline. His face was pale, his lips moving silently, as if he were still reciting the chant. But the circle was gone, the faint glow of its protective power extinguished. "Sarah," I whispered, my voice trembling. She was gone. The memory of her scream echoed in my mind, raw and haunting. The way the frost had crept across her skin, the way her body had gone limp as the creature dragged her into the shadows, it was burned into my vision. "Did it work?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Alex didn't answer. He just stared at the journal, his hands trembling. I stood and stumbled toward the door, my legs weak and unsteady. Outside, the ice was smooth and unbroken, the cracks and shadows erased as though they had never been there. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the stillness wasn't peace. It was a warning. "We have to leave," I said, turning back to Alex. He finally looked up, his eyes hollow. "It's not over," he said, his voice hoarse. "What do you mean? We closed the gate." He shook his head, holding up the journal. The chant wasn't meant to seal it. It was meant to appease them, to buy time. I stared at him, the weight of his words settling over me like a suffocating fog. Buy time for what? For them to choose who stays. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. The cabin felt colder, darker, the air thick with a presence I couldn't see but could feel, something watching, waiting. "They're still here," Alex whispered. "Beneath the ice. They were never trapped. They're part of it. And now they've taken Sarah, and Tim, and Claire." His voice cracked on her name. I felt it then, a faint vibration under my feet. It wasn't the creatures clawing at the ice, it was a heartbeat. The ice itself was alive, pulsing with an ancient, malevolent energy. "We need to go," I said, grabbing Alex's arm. He didn't resist as I hauled him to his feet. We stumbled out of the cabin, the cold biting at our skin. The snowbanks that had once trapped us were gone, the forest path visible in the faint glow of the moon. The rink was silent as we passed it, but I refused to look down. I could feel their eyes on me, the weight of their hollow stares pressing against my back. We ran through the woods, the crunch of snow under our boots the only sound. The path seemed longer, the trees twisting into unfamiliar shapes. Every shadow felt alive, every gust of wind carrying whispers that I couldn't quite understand but knew were meant for me. When we finally reached the van, it was covered in a thin layer of frost. The doors groaned as I wrenched one open, shoving Alex inside before climbing in after him. The engine sputtered, refusing to turn over. I slammed my hand against the steering wheel, cursing under my breath. "Come on," I whispered. Finally, the van roared to life. I didn't wait to warm it up, slamming the gear shift into drive and peeling out onto the snow-covered road. The forest blurred past us, the trees seeming to reach for the van as we sped away. It wasn't until we were miles from the rink that I finally exhaled. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel steady. "We made it," I said, more to convince myself than Alex. He didn't respond. I glanced over at him. His face was pale, his eyes unfocused. "Alex?" His head turned slowly, his movements unnatural, jerky. His lips parted, and for a moment I thought he was about to speak. But what came out wasn't his voice. It was a low, guttural whisper, a language I couldn't understand but instinctively feared. I slammed on the brakes, the van skidding to a stop. "Alex, stop!" I shouted, shaking him. His eyes locked onto mine, and I saw it. Something dark, something not him staring back at me. The whispers grew louder, echoing in my mind, filling every corner of the van. The frost on the windows crept inward, spiraling across the glass like veins. I stumbled out of the van, falling to my knees in the snow. Behind me, the whispers stopped abruptly. When I turned back, the van was empty. Alex was gone. The forest was silent again, the air heavy with the weight of what I'd left behind. I don't know how I made it back to town. When I finally walked into the police station, rambling about the rink and my missing friends, they looked at me like I was insane. They found nothing. No rink, no cabin, no bodies. Just an empty clearing. But I know what I saw. And every New Year's Eve, when the ice freezes over and the air turns still, I hear them. The whispers, the scratching. They're still there, waiting beneath the surface, waiting for someone to look down.